Hello everyone. So in today's video we're going to understand why India is unhappy with the different credit rating agencies you have globally such as Moody's, Standard and Poor's and Fitch and so on. Now at a recent press event you had the Commerce Minister of India who talked about how the methodologies which different credit rating agencies use does not accurately reflect India's potential or India's economic performance. Now this is because India is actually one of the largest and fastest growing economies globally. Despite that, the rating which India has is just a few notches above the junk status, or it is basically a rating which is almost in the investable category, that it is almost at the margins where it is just safe to invest. Now the ratings which these agencies provide matters because this clearly affects how the world perceives the Indian economy, and it clearly impacts the cost at which India can borrow funds. So what we're going to do in today's video is that we're going to understand what is credit rating, what are different credit rating agencies, and why does India have a problem with the methodologies which these agencies are actually using. So to understand, let's start with what is meant by credit rating. Now let's take a simple example first and understand. Let's say you have an option of lending 10 lakh rupees and there are two types of people in front of you. So you have an individual A and you have an individual B. Now let's rate these two individuals on two parameters, which is income. So let's say A has a more stable or a regular income stream, whereas B has a more irregular income stream. Secondly, let's talk about payment track record. So let's say A has a flawless payment track record, that is A has consistently paid back all the borrowings it has ever taken, and it has done that in a time bound manner. Whereas if you talk in context of B, it has been slightly inconsistent. Now clearly this is a no-brainer that if you're given a choice of lending money between A and B, you would be most inclined to lend money towards A. In fact, you might even be willing to offer money to A at a lesser interest rate because you know that your funds are going to be safe. So this is what credit rating is, and credit rating agencies perform this same function in the financial market. That is, they assess different borrowers in regards to what is the likelihood as to how efficiently or how effectively that borrower will repay the debt it has taken, or it will repay its debt obligations on time. So credit rating agencies assess the likelihood that the borrower will repay its debt obligations on time. Now the borrowers which these credit rating agencies assess in the financial market can be varied. So you could have companies which these rating agencies rate or assess, and then you could have different types of government. For example, you could have national, state and even local governments which these credit rating agencies rate. Now when the rating which these agencies provide is in regards to the national government, then that rating which is provided is called as sovereign credit rating. So this is what sovereign credit rating is. Now let's talk about the different credit rating agencies which you have right now in the world. So the 7 most popular agencies which rate India are, so you have Standard and Poor's as the first one, then you have Moody's Investor Service, followed by Fitch Ratings, then you have Morningstar DBRS, and then you have your Japanese credit rating agency. Then the second last one is your rating and investment information, and finally you have CareEdge ratings. Now out of all these 7 rating agencies, the first 3, which is Standard and Poor, Moody's and Fitch, are the most popular rating agencies globally. Now the last rating agency, which is CareEdge rating agency, is a rating agency which is headquartered in India, and it is a rating agency which, in the opinion of the government, provides a more impartial rating or assessment of India, and that is something we'll talk towards the end of the video. So given that we've understood what is meant by credit rating and we've understood the different credit rating agencies which are there, let us understand what is the scale on which these rating agencies rate different borrowers. So the scale which these agencies use is a alphabetical scale. So you have a scale which moves from A alphabet towards D alphabet. Now any rating which is closer to alphabet A is more safe. That is, you have rating which starts from triple A and it goes towards D. So any borrower which has a rating of triple A is considered most safe or least likely to default. So if any entity has a rating of triple A, money can be safely lent to that entity because that entity is almost certainly going to pay back that borrowing or that borrowed money. After AAA, the next set of ratings which are given are AA plus, then you have AA and then AA minus. After this, it moves into single alphabet of A, which is A plus, A and A minus. Once the A grades of ratings get over, then comes the B grades of ratings. So you have triple B plus, triple B and then triple B negative. And so this is where the almost investment safe category ends. So any rating which is still triple B negative in general in the market is considered as almost worthy of investing, and any rating below that is considered in general unsafe to lend money to. So a learning out here would be that any rating which is closer to A is safe and any rating which is closer to D is unsafe. So this is how rating scale works. Now why does this rating actually matter? This rating matters because a sovereign credit rating in a way, or it actually affects the interest rate at which governments can borrow money from global investors. So the sovereign credit rating affects the cost of borrowing for a country. So to take an example, let's say you have country A which has a triple A rating, and then you have a country which has a triple B rating. Now given what we've learned right now, we know that a triple A rating is much better than a triple B rating. So clearly investors will be more inclined to lend money to country A. In fact, they might be willing to lend that money at a better interest rate, whereas if country B wishes to borrow, it might have to offer a higher interest rate or it might have to accept funds at a higher interest rate. So clearly these ratings matter because a better rating helps lower the borrowing cost. Also, it provides greater confidence to investor who's lending the money, and thereby collectively a better rating helps provide access to global capital easier. So it makes it easier for countries to access global funds. Now the way these rating agencies decide these ratings, these alphabetical ratings, depends on two broad parameters. So they assess the borrower's first ability to pay, and the second parameter they assess is the willingness to pay. So we're going to talk about both these parameters. Now the first parameter which they assess is the ability to pay. That is, they assess the economic capacity of the borrower to repay back its debt obligations, and they do that by assessing the borrower on different quantitative parameters such as what is the economic growth rate in a country, what are the fiscal deficit levels, what are the current government debt levels, what are the external debt obligations, how high are the forex reserves in the country, and what is the tax revenues, because that will help also determine what is going to be the repaying capacity of the borrower. So all these parameters which these rating agencies use to assess the ability to pay are your quantitative parameters. That is, you have pure numbers and through that you can objectively assess the borrower's paying capacity. The second parameter which these agencies use is the willingness to pay. That is, they assess the political and institutional capacity of the borrower to repay its debt obligations. Now they do that by assessing the borrower on different qualitative parameters. So they assess the borrower on different qualitative parameters. That is, they assess the borrower on how credible are the policies in that country. So for example, if government formulates a policy, do they actually go through with that policy? So for example, if the government says that they want to reduce the fiscal deficit in the next 5 years, so do they actually successfully go through with that, or do they not implement it as they promise? Second is the quality of the institution. So how credible are the institutions, how impartial are the institutions such as judiciary or different regulators such as central bank and so on. The third qualitative parameter is the governance standards. That is, how transparent, accountable is the governance standard of that country, because that provides confidence to investors and it incentivizes or creates an incentive for investors to lend money to that country. The fourth qualitative parameter is political stability. That is, how stable are the governments of that country, because that in a way reflects that will the country be able to carry on with long-term policies it wants to implement. And the final qualitative parameter could be the rule of law. That is, to what extent are rules and policies effectively implemented, because let's say if there is a contract, an investor will want to know that to what extent that contract will be implemented in a just and fair manner. So these are the qualitative parameters through which credit rating agencies assess the willingness or the capacity of the borrowers to repay their debt obligations. Now the thing is that the ability to pay, which we talked about, can be determined based on quantitative metrics. That is, you have hard numbers which can prove the economic capacity of the country. However, if you talk about the willingness to pay, it's a different matter. Why? Because willingness to pay, which these agencies are deciphering, is based on qualitative metrics, and this relies more on opinions rather than hard numbers. It's subjective because opinions which people have on different matters such as policy stability, to what extent is, say, governance standard good or quality of institutions good, these can differ based on different opinions which different people have. So that is the thing. So the first set of parameters these agencies use is more quantitative, and the second set of parameters these agencies use to arrive at rating is very qualitative. Now if you talk about in context of India, India for the longest time had a rating which was almost on the margins of being worthy of investing. However, in August 2025, after 18 years, you had Standard and Poor which upgraded India's sovereign rating from triple B minus to triple B. However, despite this upgrade, India's rating still remains only a few notches above junk status. Now, India has a problem with this because India feels, and this is also true, that these ratings given which they are even right now does not recognize India's current economic strength. That is, India has a strong economic growth in a global economy where countries are not doing well. India has consistently delivered a decent to high growth rate. Secondly, India has a large domestic market. Also, we have very high forex reserves which provide a guarantee that India will honor its debt obligations or any external obligations it has. Also, we have a very stable financial system which was demonstrated after the 2008 global recession, when a lot of the world economies were severely impacted. India was not impacted to that extent. Also, we have a very strong revenue base which demonstrates that we have the ability to raise funds, and hence we will be able to repay whatever obligations we have. In fact, apart from these, the government actually talked about how unfair these credit rating agencies are when the government published the economic survey in 2021. In fact, there was a chapter which was dedicated towards credit rating agencies, and the three key points in that chapter was that it is for the first time that the world's fifth largest economy has such a low rating. So this is first time and this is quite puzzling. Also, India has very strong macroeconomic fundamentals which clearly demonstrate that we have the ability to pay. Also, in the past, India has faced multiple crises, and despite that, India has never defaulted on any of its sovereign debt payments. So, this clearly shows that we have a willingness to pay. So, we're not the type of country which is going to go back on its external debt obligation. So, we have both the ability to pay and we have the willingness to pay. But the problem which India has is in the methodology, and that is because these credit rating agencies rely too much on the qualitative metrics rather than the quantitative ones. So while we do well both on the ability and the willingness aspect, but these agencies rely too much on the qualitative aspects rather than the quantitative ones. And these qualitative metrics are based on the opinion of a small group of experts, and these can be extremely subjective, and thereby they can skew the overall rating. So while if you talk about in a general sense, we have both the ability and the willingness, but because these rating agencies rate predominantly, or they give a higher weightage to qualitative metrics, and because these are based on the opinion of a small group of people, and because they have a dominant weight in the overall rating, so thereby they skew the rating in a way which is unfavorable towards India. And the quantitative metrics where India performs has a relatively lower weight. So this is the key problem which India has. Now, as a counter to this, you have another credit rating agency which we talked about, Care Edge Ratings. Now this is a rating agency which is headquartered in India. And because this is headquartered in India, the government feels that this agency is more tuned to the local economic realities. So thereby even the qualitative assessment which it will have is going to be more objective, or it's going to be more in tune with the reality. And also the other thing which is good about this agency is that this agency, when it comes to the methodology which it employs, it assigns a greater weightage to quantitative factors over the qualitative factors. So while this agency and the methodology which it follows is fair, the thing is that globally, when you talk about global investors, they still have a tendency to look out for the ratings which are given by the more popular agencies such as Moody's, Fitch and Standard and Poor. And these ratings are by these agencies dependent or driven more by qualitative factors, which is based on an opinion of few people rather than the quantitative factors. And that's why the rating which India is getting is not in tune with India's current reality, and that is why India feels that India is not given a rating which is fair, and that's why it has to bear a cost which is unfair to India. So this is all we wanted to discuss in context of India and the credit rating agencies and how they have been unfair to India. I hope you liked this video. If you did, follow the channel for more concepts in regards to UPSC economics. Thank you so much for watching.